China's newest robot looks back at you, watching your face the way a person might. It blinks. It has manicured nails, styled hair, and skin soft enough to pass for the real thing at arm's length. It comes in a version built to look like a man and a version built to look like a woman. And on the day it went on sale, more than 13,000 people ordered one. This isn't a factory robot. It isn't designed to weld car parts or carry boxes across a warehouse floor, the kind of work most humanoid robots built over the last several years were designed for. It was built quite deliberately to be a companion. The company selling it says it will read your mood. It says it will never betray you. It says, in exactly these words from the executive running the consumer brand behind it, that it will always be loyal to you and will love you unconditionally. Sit with that for a second, because that's not typical tech industry marketing language. Companies sell speed. They sell battery life. They sell processing power, camera resolution, screen brightness, the kind of specifications you can put on a chart and compare side by side across competing products in a store aisle. This company is selling loyalty. It's selling unconditional love. And 13,000 people on the first day it was available decided that pitch was worth roughly $17,600 each. Here's why this moment matters far beyond one product launch. For years, the humanoid robot race has been framed almost entirely as an industrial story. Automation, manufacturing, warehouses, factory floors replacing human labor with machines that can walk and grip and lift the way we do. That's a real story, and it's still very much unfolding, with billions of dollars and entire national industrial strategies riding on it, entire government ministries setting production targets and tracking output the way they'd track steel or semiconductors. But this robot isn't trying to replace a factory worker. It's trying to replace something far harder to engineer, and arguably far more valuable to whichever company gets there first: a relationship. If a company can convincingly sell people a machine that meets an emotional need instead of a physical one, the humanoid robot industry stops being just a tools business. It starts becoming something closer to an entirely new product category, one humanity has never really had before at any real scale, and the company that gets the formula right first captures a market with no real historical precedent and potentially no ceiling at all. So how did we get here? How did the industry go from clunky, tethered, lab-bound humanoid prototypes that could barely walk across a stage to a mass-produced companion robot with 13,000 pre-orders in a single day? And what does it actually mean, in practical terms, for a machine to be engineered to read your emotions? Stay with this, because the answer isn't just a story about better motors or smarter software. It's a story about a company making a very specific, very calculated bet about what people are actually missing in their lives right now, and building a physical product designed to fill that exact gap. It helps to remember that companion robots aren't a new idea. Engineers have tried this before for decades in one form or another. There have been robotic pets. There have been humanoid stage demonstrations that could walk, wave, and climb stairs to enormous applause and almost no real-world adoption afterward. There have been talking dolls, chatty smart speakers shaped like animals, and tabletop assistants marketed specifically to keep elderly users company through long, quiet afternoons. Almost none of it stuck in any lasting, meaningful way. The gap between a demo that wows a live audience under studio lighting and a product people actually want, sitting in their own living room every single day, has swallowed one attempt after another for the better part of 2 decades. What makes this particular moment different isn't that someone finally had the idea of a companion robot. Plenty of people have had that idea. It's that someone finally built a physical body convincing enough, wrapped it in a marketing promise bold enough, and priced the whole package accessibly enough that 13,000 ordinary people were willing to put their own money behind it before a single unit had even shipped. Start with the robot itself, because the engineering underneath it is genuinely a step change from what came before it. A difference you can measure in specific, concrete numbers, rather than vague marketing adjectives. The robot is called the U1, made by the Chinese robotics company UBTech, and it was unveiled at a launch event in Shenzhen on June 30th of this year. UBTech didn't undersell what they'd built. They billed it, in their own marketing language, as the world's first full-size, mass-produced, ultra-bionic humanoid robot. Full-size matters here more than it might sound like it should. A lot of humanoid robot demonstrations over the past several years have quietly relied on smaller-than-human builds, or robots that only really convince from a careful, flattering camera angle, propped up under studio lighting for a promotional video. UBTech built the U1 at genuine human scale and gave it 88 degrees of freedom, a measure of how many independent ways its joints and limbs can move and rotate, achieved through an advanced actuator system engineered directly into its frame. For comparison, most industrial robot arms, the kind you'd find bolted to a factory floor, operate on a small handful of degrees of freedom, built for one repetitive task and nothing else, tightening the same bolt or welding the same joint thousands of times a day without ever needing to move any other way. 88 is a number that starts to describe an actual human body, not a machine built to perform a single motion over and over. Then there's the skin. Silicone, engineered specifically to mimic human texture, warmth, and give, layered with details that read as almost aggressively human. Blinking eyelashes, manicured fingernails, carefully styled hair. This wasn't built to look like a robot wearing a human costume for a photo shoot, something plastic and glossy and obviously artificial under close inspection. It was built to pass, at least at a glance, and at conversational distance as an actual person standing in front of you. And layered on top of that physical body is the part UB Tech is actually selling hardest, the part that shows up first in every piece of their own marketing. The artificial intelligence running underneath it all. The company describes the Yuan's intelligence system as tuned specifically to read your mood. That is the entire premise of the product, stripped down to its core. Not a robot that can perform a list of useful tasks around the house, but a robot that can perceive how you're feeling in a given moment and respond to it accordingly, adjusting its tone, its posture, its responses, based on cues it's reading off your face and voice in real time. Combine that claim with a body built at full human scale and skin engineered to feel real under a hand, warm to the touch rather than cold and plastic the way robots have looked and felt for decades, and you start to understand exactly what UB Tech is actually trying to manufacture here. Not a machine in the traditional sense, a presence in the room, something that occupies physical space the way a person does, that responds the way a person might, and that, crucially, never gets tired, never gets irritated, and by the company's own promise, never leaves. Which brings us to the number that should genuinely stop you in your tracks. 13,000 orders, placed by the end of the very first day this thing went on sale. Deliveries aren't even scheduled to begin until September, months after that first wave of purchases rolled in. That means people weren't buying a demo unit they could test drive at home that same afternoon, the way you might test a new phone or a new pair of headphones in a store before deciding to buy it. They were buying a promise, sight unseen, based entirely on a launch event, a set of marketing claims, and a price tag of roughly $17,600, or about 13,300 British pounds. That is not an impulse purchase made on a whim at a checkout counter. That's a household appliance's worth of money, close to what many people pay for a used car, committed on day one, sight unseen, for a product that wouldn't physically arrive at anyone's door for months. Whatever else you conclude about whether this technology actually works as promised, that number alone tells you something real about the appetite sitting out there, waiting for exactly this kind of product to exist. Now widen the lens, because the U1 isn't happening in a vacuum, and it isn't some isolated curiosity dreamed up by a single ambitious company working alone. It's landing right in the middle of what might be the single biggest, most concentrated push into humanoid robotics the world has ever seen. And right now, almost all of that push is coming out of China. Just weeks after the U1's launch, the World Artificial Intelligence Conference took place in Shanghai, running from July 17th through the 20th, drawing more than 1,100 exhibitors across over 100,000 square meters of exhibition space, hundreds of thousands of visitors moving through halls filled with humanoid robots performing every task imaginable, from directing traffic in police uniforms to dancing on stage in front of crowds. Reporters who walked the exhibition floor described a genuinely strange scene, a humanoid robot in police uniform directing traffic outside the venue, other robots performing choreographed dance routines in front of cheering crowds, and at least one part of the exhibition space experiencing a roof collapse under the sheer scale of what organizers had built and packed in. It was, by every account, less a trade show than a coming-out party. Chinese officials used that same stage to make an explicit, unambiguous claim that the country has already taken the lead in core areas of embodied intelligence, specifically in manufacturing, in the datasets used to train these systems, and in the physical training environments needed to teach robots like this one how to move and respond convincingly. A senior official from China's Ministry of Industry and Information Technology projected that the country's total humanoid robot output alone is set to exceed 100,000 units this year. And in that same window, humanoid robotics startups across the country, companies like Unitree and Limex Dynamics, have been racing to go public, fast-tracking IPO applications in both Shanghai and Hong Kong, treating a successful public listing as proof, almost a kind of stamp of legitimacy, that this technology has crossed the line from experimental curiosity to commercially real business. Limex Dynamics alone raised $200 million in a pre-IPO funding round, just over 4 years after the company was founded. One founder caught up in that IPO wave put it about as plainly as it can be put. Listing isn't optional anymore. It's a must, because the companies that hesitate now risk being left behind entirely. The same way an earlier generation of promising Chinese electric vehicle startups quietly disappeared when they waited too long to go public, fading out while their better capitalized rivals went on to dominate the market. Put all of that together, and the U1 stops looking like an isolated consumer curiosity. It becomes the visible, consumer-facing tip of a much larger industrial and political bet that China is making on humanoid robotics as an entire category it intends to dominate outright, from the factory floor all the way to the living room, from the assembly line all the way to the bedside table. But before this starts to sound like an unambiguous triumph, a clean story of engineering catching up to ambition, there's a harder question sitting underneath all of it, and it's the one actually worth slowing down for. Does any of this genuinely work the way it's being sold? Independent observers who got a close look at the U1 and robots like it noted a specific, telling flaw. The lip sync on its speech doesn't quite land. Watch it talk for more than a few seconds, and the mismatch between mouth movement and the sound coming out becomes noticeable, even mildly unsettling, in a way that breaks the illusion the entire product is built around. It sounds like a small technical detail, a rounding error engineers will fix in the next revision, the kind of thing that gets quietly patched in a future software update. But it points to something much larger about the actual state of this technology. Building a robot that looks convincingly human in a still photograph, or across a 30-second promotional clip shot under perfect lighting with a script and a director, is one problem, and by most accounts, a mostly solved one. Building one that holds up to sustained, close, real-time interaction, the actual day-to-day conditions of living alongside something in your home, hearing it talk over breakfast, watching it move across a room while you're doing something else entirely, unscripted and unrehearsed, is a substantially harder problem, and by most independent accounts, one that has not been fully solved yet. Then there's the emotional promise itself, which deserves even more scrutiny than the lip sync. A company claiming its product will read your mood is making a categorically bigger claim than a company claiming its product has a faster processor or a longer-lasting battery. Mood, empathy, loyalty, genuine responsiveness to another person's inner state, these aren't specifications you can benchmark the same clean way you benchmark battery life in hours or processing speed in operations per second. There is, right now, no independent verified data showing the U1's underlying AI genuinely and reliably perceives human emotional states with any measurable degree of accuracy. What exists at this moment is a company's own marketing claim, a slickly produced launch event, and 13,000 people willing to bet real money on that claim before ever actually testing the finished product themselves in their own home. There's also the simple matter of scale and cost that any honest accounting of this story has to include. 13,000 pre-orders sounds enormous in isolation, and in one sense it genuinely is, especially for a device priced well above what most households spend on any single piece of consumer technology in a given year. But it's still a rounding error against the size of even a modest national population, let alone a global one. Selling 13,000 units on launch day is proof of real, serious demand from an early, enthusiastic slice of buyers. It is not yet proof that the average household anywhere is ready to bring something like this into daily life. Manufacturing a few thousand units for eager early adopters, and manufacturing the millions of units it would take to make this a mainstream household category are two entirely different industrial problems, with very different failure points along the way. From supply chains for silicone skin components to the unglamorous logistics of after-sales repair and support once these things start breaking down in ordinary homes rather than controlled showroom conditions. And that raises the uncomfortable question, sitting right at the center of this entire story, the one worth asking honestly rather than rushing past. What does it actually say about where we are, culturally and technologically, that a product marketed explicitly on unconditional love and total unwavering loyalty sold this fast, this completely, on launch day alone, in a market of over 1 billion people, where family structures, work hours, and living arrangements have all shifted dramatically in a single generation? Is this a genuine triumph of engineering finally catching up to a real, widely felt human need for companionship, connection, and someone, or something, that simply won't leave? Or is it a company that correctly identified a very specific, very marketable kind of loneliness sitting quietly in its target market, and then built an extremely convincing sales pitch around that loneliness, regardless of whether the underlying technology can fully deliver on the emotional promise it's selling? The honest answer is probably some uncomfortable mixture of both, in proportions that nobody outside UBTech's own internal sales data can currently measure with any real precision. If stories like this, the kind that dig past the headline to check what's actually real underneath a breakthrough versus what's simply being sold as one, are useful to you, subscribing costs nothing, and it genuinely helps this channel keep doing exactly that kind of digging. So where does this actually go from here? The U1 is scheduled to start shipping in September, which means the real, unavoidable test of this entire story is only a few months away. Right now, everything about the U1 exists in the comfortable gap between a slick launch event and an actual living room. The gap between a marketing promise and daily lived reality. The gap that has quietly ended so many promising consumer robots before it. Once real units start landing in real homes, the marketing claims stop being marketing claims and start becoming something people can quietly, personally compare against their own lived experience day after day, in ways no company can fully script, control, or spin after the fact. That's the moment that will actually tell us whether this was a genuine leap forward in human-machine companionship, something people come to rely on and even love in some form, or a very well executed, very well-timed pre-order campaign for a product that simply isn't ready yet to live up to the promise printed on its own marketing. Either way, the broader pattern unfolding here is considerably bigger than any single robot. China isn't just building industrial machines that happen to move like people anymore. It's now explicitly building machines designed to be wanted in the same emotional register as a partner, a companion, or a close friend, and pricing them low enough, relatively speaking, against the scale of the ambition involved that ordinary consumers, not just factories, logistics companies, and government procurement programs, are the ones lining up around the block to buy in. If that formula genuinely works, even imperfectly, even with a lip sync glitch or two still needing to be ironed out, it doesn't just change the robotics industry from the inside. It opens up an entirely new consumer category that essentially didn't exist in any meaningful commercial sense a year ago. Think about what that actually implies. Every other major humanoid robot story of the last few years, the warehouse pickers, the factory assembly assistants, the delivery bots navigating sidewalks, has ultimately been a business-to-business story, sold into companies with procurement departments and return on investment spreadsheets, not sold directly into someone's living room on the strength of a promise about love and loyalty. The U1 quietly breaks that pattern. It's the first humanoid robot at real scale where the customer isn't a corporation weighing labor costs against automation savings. The customer is a person buying something to keep them company, the same emotional transaction that drives pet ownership, or a long-distance relationship, or subscription to a service designed to make you feel less alone. And right now, at this exact moment, the company furthest ahead of that curve is Chinese, not American, not European, and not by a small or ambiguous margin. That matters strategically as well as commercially. Industries that get their first mass consumer foothold rarely lose the advantage that early foothold provides. The company that sells the first 13,000 units gets 13,000 households worth of real-world usage data, 13,000 data points on what breaks, what charms people, what creeps people out, and what quietly gets returned after the novelty fades. That's an advantage a competitor trying to enter the same market a year later doesn't get to skip past. Whether that lead actually holds over the next few years, whether the emotional promise ever genuinely catches up to the engineering underneath it, and whether regulators and societies elsewhere even want this particular kind of product circulating widely once the novelty wears off, are exactly the questions. The next chapter of this story is going to force all of us to answer, whether we feel ready to or not, and whether we like the answer or not. What's certain right now is only this. A Chinese company built a robot, gave it a face, a mood, and a promise of unconditional loyalty, and 13,000 people said yes before they'd even seen it in person. However this particular story ends, that single fact alone tells you something true about where the humanoid robot race is actually headed next. And it isn't the warehouse.